Hello everyone. Well, I had quite the interesting, eventful week. I'd love to tell you the stories about it, but I do need to revisit this topic first, kind of because I said I would, and because so much information, so many odd takes on the story. I remember someone commented on one video, don't know what to make of this anymore. There's just so many stories from so many different directions coming in, but let me say this first. Now, I am very reluctant to use the word hate, given that that word's being thrown around carelessly by leftists as an accusation of conservatives being haters anytime they bring up very valid questions of where the world and their own countries are going, are headed. The truth is, conservative people are the most caring people I have ever talked to. And even though government schools did everything they could to tell me that the Democrats are the people who care about the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, their actions have definitely proven very much otherwise. They promised a fair election. They continuously badgered Donald Trump with, "Will you accept the results of the election?" Yet when Trump won, in a presidential race that was in every way stacked against him, what did the Democrats do? They threw unending tantrums, accused him of being a fascist, which he is absolutely not, throw false rape accusations at him, which is one of the most evil things to do without very grounded evidence. At the end of my last video about the Majory Stoneman Douglas High School massacre carried out by Nicholas de Jesus Cruz, I said from the articles I read, with the limited details we had at the time to fact check, that there had been 18 school shootings so far in this year of 2018. That is inaccurate, and I apologize for repeating that prematurely. I think the person who explains this lie that was going around about there having been 18 school shootings as of February 14th in the year 2018 is Ben Shapiro, and I want to briefly play that explanation for you.
Yeah, there's a group called Everytown. Everytown is a gun control group. And Everytown said that there were 18 school shootings in the month of January. Now, you may be wondering, why didn't I hear about those school shootings every single day? The answer is because there were not 18 school shootings in the month of January. There were more like 3. Okay? Even 1 is terrible. But there were no mass school shootings, and the ones that exist are bad enough without you having to blow it up to 18. Okay? We can go through them. Right? ABC News said there were 18 school shootings in the first 45 days of 2018, according to Everytown. And New York Daily News said the same thing. But that's not true. Okay, twice, so they counted these as gun incidents on campus. Twice, someone shot themselves on a school grounds. One incident on January 3rd featured a man shooting himself in a former school's parking lot. On January 10th, a teen killed himself in an Arizona elementary school bathroom. Okay, that is not a school shooting, that is a school suicide. Okay, 4 times, a bullet was fired through a school or dorm's window. A gunshot on January 4th was fired at a high school in Seattle through an office window. No one was hurt. On January 10th, a shot was fired shattering a California University classroom window. No injuries reported. The same day in Texas, a bullet was accidentally fired through a classroom wall at the Grayson College Criminal Justice Center. No one injured. On January 15th, a bullet traveled through a residential hall's dorm room. No injuries reported. On January 25th, a Mobile, Alabama high school student fired a gun on campus. No injuries. On January 26th, shots were fired from a car in a parking lot. No injuries. On February 5th, a 3rd grader pulled the trigger on a cop's gun. No one was injured. On February 8th, a shot was fired inside Metropolitan High School. No one was injured. Okay, there have only been a few cases in which someone was injured other than the shooter. January 22nd in Texas, a teenage girl was wounded by shots from a semi-automatic handgun. At the same day, a 14-year-old boy was injured in a shooting in Gentilly, Louisiana. February 1st, 5 children were injured in an accidental shooting, so that's not even a purposeful shooting, it's accidental. And finally, on February 5th, a teenager was shot and injured outside a high school. There are only 3 deadly shootings, apparently, in the last 45 days. So that is still awful. Every one of these is awful. Every one of these is tragic and terrible and an act of evil. That does not mean that 18 happened. So I think that it's just important to get the statistic correct. Like, you wonder why people don't trust the media. It's because the media don't bother to do any of this. They just give you the bottom line, 18 school shootings, and then the minute you dig into it, you realize there were not 18 school shootings, there were 3. Right? A football player was shot and killed in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. In Benton, Kentucky, 2 people were killed, another 15 shot at Marshall County High School. January 31st, there was a fight that broke out at a Pennsylvania high school, and a 32-year-old man was shot and later died. So that is not the same as what the media have been telling you. But the media's malfeasance here has been really quite awful.
Now, of course, we all knew the instant we first heard about this latest shooting, this horrible and tragic massacre, which for many of us was, when we first heard, only an hour or 2 after it began, that people were going to jump on the opportunity to bring up the debate about gun control, banning guns, even long before many of the facts were found. The attack from the left upon the right over the issue of gun control, banning guns, even of repealing the Second Amendment, which is an action that should never be undertaken, is being screamed for across the nation. It is the worst possible idea imaginable, and we will talk about why as we go on. One thing that has recently come out is that there was an armed officer at the high school who never went into the building to stop the shooter or even investigate. This is very strange behavior, to say the least. I'm going to play a little bit of Stefan Molyneux's recent video titled "What Pisses Me Off About the Florida School Shooting Scandal," where he talks about the history of both the behavior of Nikolas Cruz, the red flags it shot up really everywhere, really, seen as when he made posts about being a school shooter, he used his real name, and the lacking response. And he has 3 different videos on the topic. I'm talking about Stefan, not Nicholas. 3 different video analyses on the topic of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School shooting as of now, and I highly suggest you watch and listen to them in their entirety. I will link to them in the description below, among other sources. So, here we go.
So, what was the history of all of this? How did this come about? February 5th, 2016? 2 years plus ago. And this is when Nikolas Cruz was 17. Of course, not an adult yet. February 5th, 2016, a deputy at the Broward Sheriff's Office gets an anonymous call. And the caller said that Nikolas Cruz, who was 17 then, of course, had threatened on Instagram to shoot up his school and had posted a photo of himself with guns. Well, this tip is then sent to BSO Deputy Scott Peterson, the guy who did nothing while the shootings went on. And September 23rd, 2016, a peer counselor reports to Peterson that Cruz might have ingested gasoline in an attempt to kill himself, was cutting himself, and really wanted to buy a gun. This comes to the attention of a mental health counselor who advises against committing Cruz involuntarily. But don't worry, the high school reports that it's going to conduct a threat assessment. September 28th, 2016, an investigator for the Florida Department of Children and Families says that Cruz is stable, despite fresh cuts on his arms. Now, this is back when his mother, his adoptive mother, Linda Cruz, was still alive. She said that in the past he wrote a racial slur against African Americans on his book bag and had recently discussed the buying of firearms. Now, as I've talked about before, September 24th, 2017, a YouTube user named Nikolas Cruz, same spelling, of course, as the killer, says that he wants to become a professional school shooter. And the YouTuber on whose channel the comment is made reports this to the FBI in Mississippi, which says they couldn't find him. Couldn't find him. I guess they're busy looking for non-existent Russian connections between Trump and Putin. November 1st, 2017. Linda Cruz's cousin, Catherine Blaine, calls BSO to report that Nicholas Cruz has weapons and begs for the police to recover them. According to the BSO, a, quote, close family friend, end quote, agrees to take the firearms. November 29th, 2017. So there was a family in Palm Beach County that took in Nicholas Cruz after the death of his mother, and they called the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office to report a fight between Nicholas Cruz and their son, who was 22. And a member of the family said that Cruz had threatened to, quote, get his gun and come back, end quote, and that he has, quote, put the gun to others' heads in the past. And the family apparently did not want him to be arrested. Once he calms down, putting a gun to someone's head does not strike me as specifically legal. So, November 30th, 2017. Somebody from Massachusetts calls BSO to say that Nicholas Cruz is collecting guns, collecting knives, and could be, and I quote, a school shooter in the making, end quote. And they say, oh, you gotta call the Palm Beach Sheriff. January 5th, 2018. A caller to the FBI's tip line says that Cruz has, quote, a desire to kill people, end quote, and could potentially conduct a school shooting. This is never passed on to the Miami office of the FBI. February 14th, 2018, of course, Nicholas Cruz attacks the school. And the school's resource officer, Scott Peterson, pulls his gun out, stands around outside the building where Cruz is inside, gunning down students and staff. He does not enter. And it is almost incomprehensible how much of the school and the mental health system and the child and family service system and law enforcement and so on, how much they failed to take any action that could have easily prevented this horrifying slaughter. The FBI heard about Cruz's verified mental health issues, didn't follow up. The Broward County didn't do anything to deal with this that I can tell, but they received more than 20 calls about this evil young man over the years. And of course the officer, whose entire job description reads, keep the children safe, stood around while they were being slaughtered.
So, a question. Is this really about guns? Or is it about negligence? Now, let me talk about a few things that come to mind right off the top of my head. What transpired in Florida this past Valentine's Day was a confusing set of situations and lead-ups to. Apparently Nicholas's peers, the other kids in school, had for many years, since middle school some of them say, he was a danger. He was constantly talking and posting about weapons, using his real name on social media. He wasn't even trying to hide it. While enthusiasm about weapons alone is not enough cause for real concern, when it is accompanied with extremely violent behavior spanning many years, well, that should certainly raise red flags, and it did. It did. But over those years, people who had authority over Nicholas, over actually doing something, I mean, the kids really didn't. The ones who had some responsibility and authority chose to do nothing. There were a couple of very tiny things, but he had no criminal record. Had he, and in particular, had he had the record he earned through his behavior, no gun shop would have sold him anything. The massacre he committed was not the gun store's fault. Cruz had no record, yet the store has been forced to close. This is just one unjust punishment people have given to the wrong target to keep avoiding the core of the matter. I am very ashamed of the reactions to all this. Very little has been done in the right direction. Whenever there is another mass shooting, it is an easy temptation to say, as an immediate and admittedly understandable response, that if there were no assault rifles, or no guns at all, or no weapons at all, none of this would ever have happened. But there are some problems with that hypothesis, that narrative. People have had guns ever since there were guns. When some new technology, be it a medium of communication or a weapon or anything, it doesn't just go away because it creates a problem here or there. There are places in the world where there is very little gun violence. A lot of people like to use Japan as an example, but Japan, and up until a few years ago, the Nordic countries, Scandinavia, had two very important characteristics. Very ethnically homogeneous, and very peaceful in culture. Now, they have their own very real issues, to be sure. Japan overworks the men to the point where they die untimely, lonesome deaths, and is not producing many children. And Scandinavia, well, past few years opened its doors to a very literal great flood of extremely violent third world immigrants, as has Europe, and look how well that is going. And school shootings really only started up in the United States in the 1980s. And again, for a very in-depth discussion about the deep-rooted seeds of how this began, you need to watch Molyneux's videos about school shootings. Particularly the one titled The Ugly Truth About School Shooters. There's just too much for me to go through myself in any one video. The video is titled The Ugly Truth About Mass Shooters. Sorry about that. Anyway, it is also a very quick and easy response to say, and it is said about people who carry out both mass shootings and terrorist attacks. You could say there's little distinction, and often that's true, but it is said even when there is evidence of an additional or alternate motive. The quick and easy response is to label the perpetrator as having a mental illness. And frequently brought up are illnesses such as ADHD and autism, but there's a problem with that line of explanation. First of all, if a parent wants there to be something wrong with their child, or any caretaker wants there to be something wrong with their ward, they will find a way to make something up and convince the doctors to go along with it. Now, ADHD has been widely accused, and I think very justifiably, of being a label invented for children who have trouble sitting in class all day and being overstructured and overregulated in scales way beyond what human nature, particularly human children, ever evolved to be able to deal with or endure. And I think that, I think this is a very grounded accusation, especially looking at what schools have become. There is also the danger that ADHD and autism is being used as an immediate label. The children who show other behavioral problems without bothering to dig any deeper to the source of the issue. And that is something we have to guard against doing. Every time there's a school shooting or another massively violent crime committed by a relatively young person, even if they're no longer legally a minor, we do seem to get this excuse, or at least explanation, quite a lot. And even though having a mental health issue may be something of a risk factor, it does get suspicious when we are told this each and every time. It does raise some questions. This brings me to another, subtopic. There is an article I've been meaning to read and discuss. I'll get around to doing so in full one of these days. The article is titled "The Drugging of the American Boy." It's written by Ryan DeGostin for Esquire and was published on March 27th, 2014. I'll, along with other sources, link to it below in the video description. The first paragraph gives a summary. It says, "By the time they reach high school, nearly 20% of all American boys will be diagnosed with ADHD. Millions of these boys will be prescribed a powerful stimulant to normalize them. A great many of these boys will suffer serious side effects from those drugs. The shocking truth is that many of these diagnoses are wrong, and that most of the boys are being drugged for no good reason, simply for being boys. It's time we recognize this as a crisis." And yeah, this is a big problem. I have a younger brother, well, half brother really, who is finishing his sophomore year of high school right now. I guess the spring just started, but you know what I mean. And he tells me that many of his friends have told him that they were put on ADHD medication when they were younger. Many of them. Now, he didn't mention whether they were still on them or not. He probably doesn't know any updates, but this is immensely disruptive of and destructive to the formative years of a child, to be on unnecessary medications. I don't know if my brother himself was. I hope not. And I did not hear that he was, but had he been, I, as the older sibling, would have been powerless to stop it, despite knowing full well that this is almost always the wrong thing to do with a boy. And to feel powerlessness doesn't feel great. And these ADHD drugs, the detrimental effects they have on a boy's development and sanity are relevant. Quoting from a little further down in the article, "If you have a son, you have a 1 in 7 chance that he has been diagnosed with ADHD." I'm reading from the Drugging of the American Boy article again. If you have a son who has been diagnosed, it's more than likely that he has been prescribed a stimulant. The most famous brand names are Ritalin and Adderall. Newer ones include Vyvanse and Concerta to deal with the symptoms of that psychiatric condition. Yeah, more than likely that made-up condition. The Drug Enforcement Administration classifies stimulants as Schedule II drugs, defined as having a high potential for abuse and with use potentially leading to severe psychological or physical dependence. And this is in parentheses. According to a University of Michigan study, Adderall is the most abused brand name drug among high school seniors. In addition to stimulants like Ritalin, Adderall, Vyvanse, and Concerta, Schedule II drugs include cocaine, methamphetamine, Demerol, and OxyContin. My God, how much? What are they doing to these boys? How much stuff are they on? See, this is not small stuff. This is really serious. Oh, hold on, I got a close-up pop-up. Okay, so I'm back with the article. All right, now I'm reading yet further down. According to manufacturers of ADHD stimulants, they are associated with sudden death in children who have heart problems, whether those heart problems have been previously detected or not. They can bring on a bipolar condition in a child who didn't exhibit any symptoms of such a disorder before taking stimulants. Oh boy. They are associated with new or worse aggressive behavior or hostility. They can cause new psychotic symptoms, such as hearing voices and believing things that are not true, or new maniac symptoms. They commonly cause noticeable weight loss and trouble sleeping. In some children, some stimulants can cause the paranoid feeling that bugs are crawling on them. Facial tics. They can cause children's eyes to glaze over, their spirits to dampen. As if terrible family situations weren't already doing that, but wow. One study reported fears of being harmed by other children and thoughts of suicide. So, and it was reported that Nicholas's adoptive mother, Linda Cruz, told mental health professionals that he had been diagnosed with ADHD. Who knows if that was a true diagnosis or a made-up thing? You know, once he was on these drugs, he had been prescribed medication for ADHD. Well, we just went through a list of some of the terrible things these medications can do to one's psyche. We also know that police were called to investigate Nicholas Cruz 39 times over a 7-year period for various cunning behavior, threats of suicide, violence towards others, for acts of child and elderly abuse, the posting that he wanted to be a professional school shooter. And all of that still did not earn him a criminal record, which means no matter how strict a background check, he would have passed. He would have passed. And the sheriff of the county in which the school is located, Broward County, the sheriff's name is Steve Israel. He, of course, jumped on the gun control wagon when he and his force did nothing to stop Cruz when they had, for years, every reason to. I'm going to go back to Ben Shapiro and play a clip from his CNN's Hour of Hate video. And with others, I will link to this one as well.
Broward County Sheriff Steve Israel was there as well, and he was there in his full-scale Democratic capacity. So let's do a quick flashback. This sheriff, whose department missed 39 separate warnings on this kid. Okay, the shooter, the department was visiting this shooter's home 6 to 7 times a year for years. Okay, and they still didn't have enough authority, supposedly, to put this kid away, to get to take guns away from this person. I mean, the sheriff's office missed it. They blew it. But what is the sheriff blaming it on? Well, of course, he's going to blame it on guns. So here's a flashback. Here's Steve Israel. This is just last week, standing with Rick Scott, the governor of the state of Florida, and pushing gun control in front of Rick Scott.
If you're an elected official and you want to keep things the way they are and not do things differently, if you want to keep the gun laws as they are now, you will not get reelected in Broward County.
Right, so that guy right there is obviously a political actor with a political agenda, but he was portrayed on CNN as just a sheriff, right? Just a law enforcement official. Okay, the guy's a Democrat, obviously, and he has an agenda, pretty obviously. Nowhere was that clearer than when Dana Lash over at the NRA, who was there, asked the sheriff, okay, so why didn't you stop it? Right, you're the law enforcement body. You were warned. What did you do about it? And the media's response to Dana was, how dare Dana Lash ask Steve Israel something? It's one thing to blame Marco Rubio for the shooting. It's another to blame the actual sheriff who's responsible for maintaining the safety and security of the students of Broward County. It's another to say that he blew it. You know, it's one thing to blame gun owners like me all the way across the country in Los Angeles. But to blame, you know, to cast any weary eye upon the sheriff who's responsible for security, how dare Dana Lash? This is clip 31. Again, look at the crowd's response to Dana asking a very solid question here.
We need the power to take every firearm they have away from them and bring them to a mental health facility.
39 visits did not meet that standard? 39 visits, assaulting students, assaulting parents, taking bullets and knives to school. Did that not meet that standard?
Well, which are you speaking about specifically? You seem to know about all 39.
Well, I know there's one Florida statute where if he's sending messages threatening, if he's sending messages threatening to kill people, that right there, under Florida state law.
Who did he send the message to kill people to?
BuzzFeed, AP, Reuters, Yahoo News all reported that was to other students.
Who was the victim?
It was sent to other students.
Dana, Reuters can't be a victim. The only person who could be a victim is an individual.
This, Sheriff, is what
so
I'm
if
saying.
an individual was threatened and it was real, that's a crime. But if he's posting things...
They were threatened with death. They were threatened that they were going to bleed. They were threatened that they were going to be killed.
Well, what's your specific case?
And he had already taken bullets and knives to school. He had already assaulted people. He assaulted his parent. He assaulted other students. 39 visits. And this was known to the intelligence and law enforcement community. Now, I'm not saying that you can be everywhere at once, but this is what I'm talking about. We have to follow up on these red flags.
You're not the litmus test.
Doesn't that meet the standard?
Okay, and of course the crowd starts turning on Dana for mentioning the fact that when you visit a home 39 times and the guy goes shoots up a school, maybe you missed something. Right? How many...
On February 21st, 2018, President Trump held a listening session inviting people who had been victims, parents of victims, relatives of victims, and all different perspectives from all over the country. And he heard them out at the White House. He heard them out. He listened to their concerns and their rantings and their arguments. He took the slings and arrows very honorably. One of the people there was Andrew Pollock, who during the shooting had been trying to find his daughter in the chaos. Tragically, she had been one of them murdered. At this White House gathering, he said to President Trump, "We need to fix this. We need to first fix the schools. The children need to be safe." This is something that many people have been saying for a while now. Not only do we need to fix the schools, we need to bring back the stable families. Schools have become little other than leftist prisons for children. Recess has been widely destroyed. The teaching of actual life skills in class by good teachers has been largely destroyed. My brother tells me that his high school, which is the same high school I went to years ago, well, not that many years ago, when kids still could actually hang out in the library or the senior lounge, if they were seniors, or go have a picnic outside during their free periods with minimal supervision, if any at all. The school is now filled with security personnel who do nothing but bully the kids. 15 to 18-year-olds, by the way, who shouldn't need such oppressive restriction. They have to have hall passes to be, or some kind of pass, to be anywhere at any time except in class. Again, teenagers shouldn't have to have this level of overregulation. And many of the teachers, not all, but many, are saying to the students they should have no life outside of school-related activities or studying for standardized tests. I have always hated standardized tests. It's horrific. And I have tried to talk to the school about this. I've tried to send them emails. I've tried to call them. They don't want to hear it. Which has convinced me, at least, to never, ever send any children I might have to public schools. I will just homeschool them. We've got to put a stop to this and bring real stable families and real childhoods back. We've got to. And Trump did suggest possibly offering bonuses to armed teachers. He said, if we had 20% of teachers armed at schools, those who are qualified, and by this he really means, ex-police, ex-military, veterans, people trained to handle firearms responsibly. And again, it's more the responsibility disappearing from our culture than the more guns that is the problem. This is one intelligent approach. Certainly an armed, trained staff member would be in an optimal position to stand in front of a shooter guarding the children. In fact, the football coach Aaron Feis himself was a graduate of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, did just that. He died shielding students from Nicholas Cruz's open fire. He was unarmed, yet stood between a killer and his targets. If he had been armed, he would have been able to stop Cruz then and there. The reality is that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Now, leftists mock that wisdom, but it is very much the truth. If you remember, Devin Patrick Kelly, the shooter who, in full body armor, walked into First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs in San Antonio, Texas, in the early November of last year, of 2017, murdered 27 people as they were attending Sunday morning church. He was ultimately stopped by civilian pursuers, good men with weapons who came to their fellow people's defense. There was a riflery club at a summer camp I went to when I was 14. Boys used to go camping, fishing, hunting with their fathers all the time, and they would be taught how to use firearms responsibly. There were clubs in middle and high schools 50 years ago or less, and school shootings were unheard of at the time. They really only started coming about in the 1980s, and for an explanation of what took place, again, it has a lot to do with the breakdown of the family and the evil of the misandrist family courts. I really need to watch Stefan's video, The Ugly Truth About Mass Shooters. CNN, of course, wants to portray everyone who supports the right of citizens. Mind you, this amendment, the Second Amendment, has always been speaking about referring to responsible citizens as people who don't care about the deaths of children or the splitting of families as long as they keep their guns. This is absolute bullshit. And if you care about keeping families together, again, gotta dismantle the family courts. You have to take care of people in your own country before you can really worry about anyone else. That should be common sense. If you look at what happens when governments are given absolute control of weapons, when they crawl their way up to power, or crawl their way increasing in power, by promising protection in exchange for freedom, it always ends in nothing but more death. Think of the genocide of the Armenian people carried out by Muslims who, in the early 20th century, who step by step took over the government, eventually to the point where there was no protection for anyone else. Actually, Muslims tend to do that a lot to other groups. Go watch Lauren Southern's videos on what is happening to the South African farmers as a result of the decades of white shaming building up unfounded black resentment. I recently heard that many of the students of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High, my God, that school has a mouthful of a name, have come forward with a list of demands which are exactly what you'd expect. Tighter restrictions on gun acquisition. And I will state the problem with those measures again. First, there already are background checks required for the legal purchasing of firearms. But without a criminal record, as Nicholas Cruz well should have had, yet didn't, there was nothing for the background check to find to stop him. Also, the removal of assault rifles from civilians will not stop school shootings. Determined killers will get a handgun, or, like some incidents in China, they'll kill with knives. It is also not that difficult to obtain a firearm illegally if one is motivated to. As for more security in schools, well, there was the armed officer assigned to the school, and he just stood outside and let Cruz have his shooting spree field day. There's also the problem of additional security personnel becoming, well, exactly what they've become at my former high school, and now my brother's high school is mere bullies. I'm going to end here, probably make another video at some point, by pointing out a possibility. The FBI had received multiple messages warning them about Cruz. It wasn't just the Broward County Sheriff's Department, it was the FBI. They all ignored them. They did nothing. The school did a little bit by the end, by kicking Nicholas Cruz out of school, but it was really too little too late. And of course, still knew exactly where the school was, knew it would be devoid of people who would be willing to fight back. Clearly that was entirely what happened. Knew he would have a field day there. The government who goes after people with threats of significant jail time if you miss even one payment on your taxes ignored the safety of your children. The FBI used a false document full of bullshit to have Trump wiretapped, spied on during the campaign without just cause, ordered by Barack Obama, paid by Hillary Clinton. So, suppose all of these departments, all of these people who should have stood in the way of Nicholas Cruz being able to carry out this massacre ignored the warning signs, knowing full well that there was a very good probability of him carrying out this killing spree. So that as soon as it did happen, the leftists in the civilian population and in the government would run crying to the government, demanding the country to be disarmed, and therefore powerless as soon as the state gains the power and opportunity again to rule over us all. They are not interested in protecting your children. They are not interested in a free and peaceful America, and all that stands in the way of doing whatever they want to do with you are, for the time being, President Trump and the Republicans, because they want smaller and a less intervening government, less ridiculous bureaucracy that gets nothing done. Clearly it gets nothing done. And what's also in their way are stable traditional families, because they have no real need of government programs, and they are the real solution to the mental health crisis. Stable families can raise healthy, stable children. There was once a time I would have called this intentional ignoring of children's safety in order to jump on the gun control wagon to assume power. Quite a leap in assumptions. No longer. I smell conspiracy, and it is not coming from the NRA. It is coming from the socialist state. Take the education and protection of your loved ones into your own hands. Stop drugging your children and start rebuilding the family. There is not much time left.